Mayor Wu, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks
so
much
for
being here.
Crowd here at the library.
Thank you very much.
What'd you
thank
bring?
you for our gifts.
What'd you bring?
Yeah, so my show and tell for this month is a couple different. Anyway, I'll just say it is chicken empanadas and shecas, which are sweet pastry bread from Raimundo Bakery and Taqueria on Dot Ave. And there's kind of multiple reasons for our choice. One is that it is open streets this coming Sunday on Dorchester Avenue, 10 to 3:30. So between Ashmont and Freeport Street, the vehicular traffic will be shut down, which means music, dancing, whatever you want to do, run free with your children in the streets, small businesses out. They're pretty close to the route. And Friday is also the start of Hispanic Heritage Month, so we have a lot of activities and events planned at City Hall, whether it's the Fiesta en la Plaza every weekend, events happening on City Hall Plaza, or various celebrations of different cultures within the kind of Hispanic heritage umbrella.
So when Mary Skipper, the superintendent of the Boston Public Schools, was here the other day, celebrated our 1-year anniversary, she brought cookies and sandwiches. Did you tell her to do that?
I did not, actually.
Is that really true?
I did not. I did not say a word.
Very kind of her and kind of you.
It's very kind. I don't think we ever got any presents from Marty Walsh all the time he was mayor. Did we ever get any presents? I don't think so.
By the way, one last note. Jamie just pointed out, or one of our colleagues did, Fiesta en la Plaza. We have the organizers and musicians from it coming this Friday. They'll be on the show as this all starts. Good to see you, Mayor Wu.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mayor Wu, we are Boston Public Radio, but a lot of people that listen to us aren't from Boston, so usually we don't talk that much about the city council in Boston. But today is the preliminary election. Not a great day for it. I hope people get to the polls. But there are 3 councilors who've had some controversies in their tenure. Ricardo Arroyo, Kendra Lara Hernandez is the 3rd councilor. Kendra Lara, people may recall, she was riding with a child in the back seat, allegedly driving too fast, and hasn't had a license for 10 years. You took a stand in the Arroyo race, backed somebody, but you kept out of the other 2, as far as I know?
Yeah, I have my, this year, these are gigantic I voted stickers. I went early this morning, and I live in one of the districts that does have a preliminary election, which is triggered when there are more than 2 candidates for the district races and then more than 8 candidates for at-large. So we're below that threshold. So there's not a citywide election today, which makes it a little bit confusing for folks, I think. But I live in District 5. I'm excited to be supporting Enrique Pepin, who knows City Hall inside out, formerly the Director of Neighborhood Services for Boston, raising his 2 kids in Roslindale, graduate of the Boston Public Schools, and we're lucky that he is stepping up to serve in this moment.
26 years old. Yeah, he's young.
Does that mean you're supporting the other 2 incumbents who've been embroiled in some controversy, Fernandez and Lara?
No, I haven't made a formal endorsement. I also don't vote in those races, and so this was about sharing the decision that I had made, and I'm following all of those very closely as well.
Speaking of voting, as you know, the Attorney General qualified several dozen questions for the November ballot next year. Obviously, they have to go out and collect signatures. One of the people collecting signatures is Max Page, head of the Mass Teachers Association, which does not represent teachers in Boston, but represents 100,000, give or take, has the MCAS as graduation requirement no more on the ballot. But one that I assume is near and dear to your heart is the rent control ballot question that Representative Connolly filed. You've said before you support it. Do you have any intention to be actively involved in the rent control? It basically seems to mirror your question, your legislation, your home rule petition, just statewide. Do you intend to get involved in the campaign?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that the 2 items interact, but they are in fact separate. And so we have filed our Boston home rule petition, which is up at the State House, and whatever happens with a statewide ballot initiative, that piece for the city of Boston only could be enacted by the state, again, regardless of the outcome. The ballot initiative would basically eliminate the need for the state legislature to get involved in any rent regulation at the municipal level in the future. And so if that passed, our ordinance would stand on its own and not need that approval, but even if it didn't pass, it could still go through with state approval. Now, there's a difference between the policies that are being put out there and then the actual groundwork of running a successful ballot campaign, which can take a lot of resources around fundraising and door knocking and all of that goes into any political campaign. And so I think there's a couple levels of assessment still yet to be seen about whether this is the right moment, because there's just a window. If you go up and then it's not successful, there's kind of a window where you can't go back up for a while. And so I think we
can't
we
go
have
back
to,
up on the ballot for a while.
On the ballot,
You could go
that's
in
right.
the legislature.
That's true.
Not,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So I think there's still more conversations to be had among the larger advocacy community about whether this is the moment to mount that kind of large-scale groundswell that would be needed, and what the other priorities are at the moment.
So you're not even on board yet, is what you're saying. You're
I support the idea of it. I
concept.
absolutely support the concept that cities should be able to make their own
But
decisions.
you're not on board on the
And
ballot question
yes,
yet.
I have yet to kind of officially
Okay.
sift through, meet with, and decide my particular involvement in that campaign.
You know, as long as Jim just mentioned, Max Page is going to be with us later, the head of the MTA, which is trying to get rid of the MCAS test. They still have the test, but they would not. You wouldn't have to pass the MCAS to graduate. They're trying to get rid of that. That's going to be in the ballot as well. Do you have an opinion on that? Whether we should get rid of the MCAS as a graduation requirement?
So I've seen the impact of high stakes testing on schools, and we're in a little bit, there's a trade-off on multiple fronts here. One, I do think it's really important to have ways to give solid information through assessments about how individual students are doing, where they might need more support, and the ability to use different tools through the classroom can give teachers that much needed information. And there's also valuable information that comes from the larger trends, where if you see among your whole class that in fact this is an area where many students need extra support, that can translate into adjustments that are needed in curriculum or an approach or something else. It should be seen, however, as a way to, again, give that feedback rather than create a spiral, often a downward spiral, for schools or for educators who, when there are specific punitive actions attached to it, rather than being seen as a way to assess and then follow through with the necessary supports.
So to be clear...
what does that mean? Does that mean you think it should still be a graduation requirement or not?
I think it's important to have graduation requirements. I am not fully I don't know enough about the particulars of MCAS versus other assessments. In Boston, we are kind of supplementing with a lot of other different options as well in terms of really getting that feedback. And so I completely agree with the push of where this is coming from, that for a long time we have created cycles of disinvestment in schools that are based on a one-time snapshot that then has many, many repercussions, instead of using these assessments in the way that they were designed for, which was to provide that support. And so whether that exists as a requirement or there are other requirements that can solidly ensure that everyone is graduating with a quality education, we need to have those standards. We need to have consistency. We can get there through Mass Core. We can get there through some of the other curriculum requirements as well. But I think it's an interplay of, if that's not there, what would be there instead, and how is the test used if it is administered.
But again, just to be clear here, you're basically saying, yes, there should be some graduation requirement. You'd prefer it not be MCAS. Is that a fair summary of what you just said?
I think we need to look at the whole experience for children, and if we reduce the graduation requirement to just having a test score, it has led to and incentivizes and creates the pressures for a system where students are taught to the test, and that is the focus of the educational environment. And so at the same time, I don't think we should just have a vacuum and erasing the idea of understanding where students need support and having a high level of quality. And so it's a larger conversation that we need to have that consistency.
Well, I want to continue this because you seem to be going in the direction of where Margie and I want to go with Max Page later, and I want to make sure you're on that same page or not, is that you want to hear what would replace it before you commit to whether or not you'd vote to eliminate it. Is
That's
that
right.
fair?
And again, my view is always very limited and focused on the city of Boston, and I know what the impacts are and how we are doing a lot of work so that the MCAS is not the be-all, end-all in our district, and moving towards the kind of very solid supports needed to be fully into Mass Core and other curriculum standards, along with other programming through International Baccalaureate and other options. But I don't know what the statewide ramifications of that move would be.
So one last thing before we get to the phone calls. School did reopen this week. What's the recap? How have things gone?
We're feeling really good.
Yeah.
Kindergartners started yesterday, and the 1st through 12th graders started the Thursday before last week. In terms of the usual metrics that are often reported, it was a very, very successful start to the school year. Our buses were, whereas last year, okay, so let me back up and say these numbers, I'm just going to say what the numbers are and then give a little more context. Last year, the exact on-time performance was 50% of the buses got to school with the GPS registering exactly at the time they were supposed to be there.
On day one.
On day one. It jumped a lot by day two. This year, we were well over 60%, but sometimes we look at within 15 minutes of the exact arrival time, and we were 85%, within 15 minutes. And I was on a bus on the very first day along with Superintendent Skipper, and you just see on the first day, especially it was hot, we went to school with gigantic bags of school supplies, and so a lot of students are opting off the bus or not sure where their location is, and so we were on the bus waiting, and we waited past the official time that the bus was supposed to leave that location because we could see down the street a little girl was coming. We thought maybe this was her stop, and it ended up being the case that she got on the bus and the bus drivers waited on that first day, and then by the time we did that a couple times, even our bus was running a few minutes late. So, there's a lot of factors that go into that. We want to have a holistic view, but overall there was a lot of progress on buses and bus on-time performance thanks to the routes being fully staffed and a lot of the improvements to the operational parameters where the drivers are trained and ready to go. We saw in the midst of a heat wave, more than 90% of schools had air conditioning installed in every classroom well in advance of that. 18 months of installing in 78 schools AC units in every window. And overall, our staffing levels we've never had this level of these small vacancies at the beginning of the school year, and I think we felt it in the momentum.
One last thing about the 95% is the thing you agreed to on time with the state, correct? Ultimately, you reached that goal. Are you on track as far as you see based upon the first couple of days, the first week?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that whole situation of negotiating a document when I was very new into the role, when we didn't have a superintendent, we were in the midst of a superintendent search, and so there wasn't someone who, of course we have an amazing team and they were advising, but Superintendent Skipper had not even been officially selected yet, much less helping guide the exact parameters and the negotiation there. So going back, I want to aim for 100%. That is, every minute lost of a child's education matters. We have had some disagreement with DESE that I think we're working through about how to even count the denominator of that percentage, because originally they were insisting that if a GPS malfunctioned on that day, it needed to be counted. And so I think we're getting there, and we're seeing great improvement. We have more work to do.
Last question. When you were here last, I'm going to characterize what you said, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong. You basically seem to be saying that what Jeff Riley, the Commissioner of Education, says to your team privately is productive and good, and he's much more critical publicly than he is in these actual work meetings. That's a fair description of what you said?
Yeah, and he's not always, just like I'm not always in the team level meetings, yeah, he's not usually in those meetings either.
Only because I'm curious about how government works amongst leaders. When the mayor of Boston makes that kind of comment about the Commissioner of Education a month ago here, do the two teams or do the two leaders talk afterwards about what it seems to me is a pretty important conflict?
I sat in and participated in that team level meeting. The next month or so, those happen on a regular basis, so I could really just more listen and understand the dynamic and the flow of kind of how specific the conversation is. The commissioner and the superintendent are in frequent contact, and I think we're working towards a chance for all of us to sit down. But, I am eager to make sure we are partnering well with the state. The set of standards that are laid out in that student improvement plan that were agreed upon between the Boston Public Schools and the state, that is a very low baseline for us. Satisfying all of those things is making sure that there are bathrooms that are functional, that there are buses that get students to school on time. Our vision and our plan for Boston Public Schools goes way beyond that document. So we actually need them not just to work with us on ensuring we're complying, but to help support us in getting the resources and the partnership to do what we actually want to do, which is deliver the best possible education for our young people.
We're talking to Mayor Wu. Should we go to the calls?
Yes, we should go to the calls. Brian in Boston, you've been very patient. Thank you for calling.
Hey,
What's
Brian.
up?
Good morning. Michelle, I think you're a terrific mayor. I think you make one smart decision after another, but there's one that doesn't make any sense to me. I live on Hemingway Street in the East Bend, and your administration intends to put contraflow bike lanes down this very, very heavily trafficked street, and there's just not room for it, and people are going to get hurt. Pedestrians in particular, are at risk of being hit by these uninsured vehicles and having their lives, in my case, I'm a violinist. If I broke a shoulder, I'm out of work and I got no recourse. What doesn't make sense to me is that a half a block away, the bicyclists could go down the parkway along the Fenway, similar to the way they share space along the Esplanade. That's the sensible solution, and I don't understand why your administration is pushing this. It was tried some years ago, and the neighborhood opposition was so vehement that the plans were dropped, but now it's being presented almost as a fait accompli. It doesn't make sense to me. I wanted to ask you about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for calling in and for being involved in the local planning efforts, it sounds like, for some amount of time. I hear your frustration, and I hear a lot of people who are very concerned about changes to streets, oftentimes, whether it's the flow, directional flow of traffic or the number of lanes or changing the use of the lanes. That is sometimes just so ingrained in our daily commutes and lives that those changes feel particularly stressful. And our approach has been, we want to ensure that we're communicating and engaging everyone and being clear about what the goal is, while also learning and measuring from what works and then making adjustments as needed. And in some ways, the types of, the tricky part about bike lanes is that you could have a great spot for a bike lane on one street that everyone agrees with and feels fine, but then if on the next block it gets complicated and the bike lane drops off, then there's no point to having installed the first part anyway. You really need a connected network for people to be fully safe throughout their whole rides and to even make that choice. We know, and I think everyone agrees at a high level, that getting more cars off the road, even just a few number of people who, we're not asking everyone to stop driving and hop on a bike, but even those few people who want to do it but don't feel safe right now, creating that safety and that infrastructure for them does ease traffic and does make the experience better for everyone else. And in fact, sometimes where it feels most stressful to have bikes on the road is exactly where we need that dedicated and protected space for bikes, because then that removes them from that ongoing conflict that relies on not having human error to swerve, drive exactly along the lines. Putting in that protected infrastructure is what will make it safer. And so the last thing I want to say is that much of our approach right now is based on kind of what's called tactical urbanism. You try it, you put up the flex posts, you build it in a way that we can see what works and see how it's going, and then be able to make the adjustments and make final decisions after that. And so in many places, we're running outright pilot programs around bus lanes or bike lanes, and in other locations, the types of materials that we're using, we are measuring very carefully what the impact is and can be responsive to that afterwards.
Brian, thank you much for your call. We really appreciate it. 877-301-8970 is the number to either text or call the mayor. And if you're here at the library and you go see Hannah, as this woman we're about to recognize has done, you may get to speak to the mayor directly. Is your name Faith?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Faith. Can you bend the microphone down just a drop?
Yes.
Perfect. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, my name is Faith. Mayor Wu, my question relates to the growing public health and safety crisis around the Boston Public Library. I live in the neighborhood, and I often see open drug use and violence in the encampments, and that activity has displaced citizens from using the bus stop, shelters, and from really the just general use and enjoyment of the library. And while the city council considers your new ordinance the one that you proposed, does the city plan to try to use any of its current enforcement mechanisms to protect these citizens who live in the neighborhood and also the people who are in the encampments who are being victimized and have services that they need? So, for example, are they being offered shelter? Is anyone trying to help them relocate their possessions and give them proper due process? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Faith. And thank you for also framing the situation in a citywide way that is about how there are multiple needs at the root of this, which we're working to address all at once in a very complex situation all around the country. I had been going through the numbers and just wanting to understand in different parts of the country what some of the approaches were. So I've been doing a lot of research as we've been working towards our proposal that will, I believe, make a big difference and is intended to very dramatically change the dynamic at MCAS and citywide. But even just starting from the data points, every single year, each city conducts what's called a point-in-time census of unsheltered individuals who are sleeping on the street because they have nowhere else to go. And that's done on one single day in the winter across the country. And that gets reported to the HUD, the federal agencies. In 2022, Boston's count of unsheltered individuals was 119 people. In Los Angeles, for example, it was almost 25,000 people. Right? So the scale of need from the combination of housing prices being very, very high and out of reach all around the country, rising opiate crisis, mental health challenges that have gone untreated is really showing up in very significant ways where cities everywhere are trying to understand how to address those root causes while also being clear that there are public safety challenges associated with this crisis that impact everyone. And so I'll just talk about this area in particular. In fact, for many years, the Back Bay Association and the local district police captain have had a partnership drawing in our public health outreach workers as well, where they have a specific program, not just to push someone out of a particular area, but to really engage and connect them with services, housing, whatever else may be needed. We have, over the last 18 months, set up an infrastructure where our coordinated response team has all of these pieces involved: public health, public safety, public works, and thinking about street sweeping and sanitation, where they are working hand in hand with community partners to provide a citywide response. Much of it is concentrated in the MCAS area because the need is so great there. But we have filed an ordinance to allow the public safety first responders to act with more immediacy. They are saying this is the protocols in place right now, which require 48-hour notice period before any action can be taken around tents that might be shielding weapons and all that. That is not working. And so we need that ordinance in place to be able to move forward with that. There's a 60-day clock on ordinances that are filed by the administration. So that clock has been running, and I believe there's been a hearing scheduled as well. So there should be some official action on that, hopefully very soon, by the City Council. And in the meantime, our goal is to try to build up the infrastructure around housing, treatment, recovery. We have now built 200 units of low-threshold housing to serve those individuals who had not historically been served in the shelters due to substance use and some of the strict rules that the shelters had applied. And we've also been working with the shelters to change some of their parameters so that everyone can find that safe and warm place to go while we get folks on track for workforce development and housing search and supports. In the long run, rebuilding Long Island and having a campus that is devoted to public health and at the scale of services that we need is really what will help Boston continue to be that center city which is serving residents from all across the Commonwealth and beyond.
Thank you, Faith. We really appreciate it.
I used to ask this of Marty Walsh, and he told me you couldn't have a boat go out to Long Island because there was an emergency. But it seems like we are at an emergency situation right now. And to wait for the bridge and to wait for the rebuild, we've got to get it rebuilt, obviously. But it does seem, having people there where they're so close to, on the one hand, the medical facilities, but also so close to people that could be tempting you with drugs or alcohol, whatever, is just a lose, lose, lose. So what does it look like? Does it look like 2 years, 4 years?
4 years.
4 years.
We're jumping in right away. There's already some requests for proposals going out with funding that have been allocated in this budget to just start to get the buildings HVAC systems and basic envelopes and everything settled and stabilized. A lot of the buildings are in pretty bad shape from having been unused for almost 9 years at this point. And so we are getting going on rehabilitating and working on those buildings even in the next couple of months. That will be up and running while we finish the permitting process through the end of this year, knock on wood, for the bridge itself. And so the goal is to do all of that in parallel so that the buildings and the bridge will be open at the same time rather than fixing one and then having to wait to do the other.
So you're thinking 4 years for the Long Island and the bridge to get there.
And a related question, a long-time listener, Bernier from Hyde Park is calling in. Bernier, you're on with the mayor.
Hi, good morning, Mayor Wu and Jim and Marjorie.
Hey,
Good morning, Bernier.
Yeah, before I start, I just want to say, honestly, thank you to Jim and Marjorie for putting this forum together, because I was having dinner with a friend the other day, and I was bragging about the fact that in Boston we have access to talking to the mayor, to the governor, to the attorney general. And I was saying that with such pride that I live in a city where we have that access. So thank you very much for this forum.
You should be thanking the mayor, not us.
Yeah.
But we appreciate it, Bernier.
Yeah, she could stiff us and not come anymore, and that would be very upsetting.
Okay, Bernier, take it away. Thank you.
Yes. The question I have, Mayor Wu, is that it would appear that we take longer, to me, than other places when a project has to happen. My street, I'm from Hyde Park, and I live on Cummins Highway, and we've been working on this reconstruction of Cummins Highway for the past 9 years. And I'm thinking, why would something take 9 years to happen? I mean, of course, I see all the processes. We have to meet with the MBTA people. We have to meet with environmental people. We have to meet with all kinds of stakeholders. But I feel like maybe we're too smart for our own good in Boston. Paralysis of analysis. China is eating our lunch because we take so long to do things. Is there a way that things can be expedited while respecting the rights and responsibilities of everybody involved?
And Bernier, are you talking about the roadway itself or buildings along the road?
I'm talking about the roadway itself. I'm talking about the bridge on River Street.
I see. Okay, yes.
Things like that.
Yes.
It takes so long for things to happen.
Yeah. It's... The bridges, in particular, are always the bane of my existence. This is there are multiple bridge projects right now that are delayed in all different parts of the city, and I think here in particular, I agree with you that we often have very, very long projects, even when they are entirely about only city and state agencies working together and not even having to get anything from the private sector or anyone else. There's a whole lot of back and forth, and we just need more predictability and a regular maintenance schedule so we're not letting those delays end up resulting in crumbling infrastructure while we're trying to figure out every single detail about the project parameters and the financing. But then in this moment, especially the pandemic and supply chains, and there's just been multiple places where the bridges have gone very, very long because they are reliant on some of the things that across the country and beyond have gotten stretched very thin. I'm going to try to figure out what the specific timeline is on finishing that portion of it, but it's something that we hear about a lot, in particular that River Street Bridge and that piece of it.
Bernier, thanks.
Mayor, we're speaking of repairing bridges and streets. We've had these disastrous floods up in Leominster. The Sagamore Bridge was closed down the Cape. This is going to be, I know you're very concerned with climate change. This is going to be our future now with these heavy rains and flooding. So I wonder if that's something that's even been considered in terms of any rebuilding of projects in Boston.
Yeah, even the Long Island Bridge, for example, is being built up higher than it was before just to account for what might end up happening over the next several decades. And it's terrifying to see the news. Morocco and Leominster, there's something every single, multiple headlines a week around the world of major what are unexpected in the moment, but now becoming more and more expected in terms of major weather and climate disasters. And so we, as a coastal city, are particularly vulnerable. Much of the downtown area is built on landfill that is right at or even below where the water is going to come back to. And so it's built into every new project, but we're also shifting more and more of our emergency management planning and resources into these natural disaster planning efforts, right? Say that we had 9 inches of rain come down in a short period in Boston, or say this weekend when Hurricane Lee comes closer and we see the storm surge. Our fire department has vehicles now that are considered, they call them their climate change vehicles, right, with the gigantic tires and being able to go through to deliver supplies or extract or rescue residents who might be isolated because of high water levels. And that is where we are headed, unfortunately, to not only try to reduce emissions and do what we can to be green and healthy, but also to be prepared for whatever might happen, because those are becoming more and more frequent.
Very quickly, before we take our break, Brunier mentioned China. Since you're a Harvard kid, did you ever read the book, I can't think of the title, by Graham Allison from the Kennedy School? We had him on about Thucydides' trap, and he talked about how bridges in China are literally constructed sometimes over a weekend. Obviously, the pre-stuff has to be done. It's just something that, he is right, China is eating our lunch.
It's a little different government over there.
I would agree. I'm not suggesting we can be them.
I've been to China exactly one time, and it was visiting before the Olympics. So it must have been sometime in 2000 and maybe early 2008 or something. So there was a lot of construction happening everywhere. And I remember one day we took a train trip out to see something, and as we were leaving the station, there was a building there that there was just men standing on top of the walls, kind of using a pickaxe and knocking away the building from on top of it. And then by the time we came back, just a couple hours later, the entire building was gone.
Oh, my gosh.
But at the same time, what stuck out to me was there was, instead of, where we would see cones just placed in different locations or caution tape, there was a person just standing there holding the barrier up, right? And that was when it means to have labor rights and human rights and protections for life safety, it translates into many, many more steps. And as Brunier is saying, maybe we're quite intense on that front, especially in Boston and Massachusetts. But we're finding ways, for example, at the city level, I'll give a little preview of something we're going to talk about soon, but there's been what are called IDP units, inclusionary development program units, where they're affordable units required for any new residential development. It is a very extensive process to match who's going to go live in those units with the actual buildings, and they're often then sitting vacant while that process goes on, long after the rest of the building's been filled in and people have moved in. And so we need to take a look at how we continue to have all of those protections that are built into those long processes to make sure it's fair, everyone knew about it was properly advertised, but to do so in a way that can then actually satisfy the original goal, which is get people housed.
Okay, before we break, speaking of Harvard, how's the job search going?
This has been fascinating. Okay, so I think it deserves clearing up here. There is absolutely no chance I would abandon this role for any other job at any organization, any other level of government.
The Herald wrote a story. For those who don't know, the Herald wrote a story suggesting you might have had some discussions with Harvard about a job.
And it had me in the story saying absolutely no, and then again at the end, but in the middle it was like, and here's when the special election would be, and here this and that. So I got my start working for Mayor Menino, and I have always believed, and having learned early on, that Boston deserves a mayor who's not eyeing the next big thing. This is the big thing. This is the most important work we could be doing, really anywhere across the country, to marshal the resources that we have with this amazing team that we have, with community members. And so we have a lot of projects that we're working on that are now, Long Island Bridge, 2027 White Stadium, 2026 rebuilding and reshaping some of the supports for our schools and school buildings years into the future. So I love my job. I think it's the best job in the world. I hope to be able to stay and have impact. And I think we're already making a difference.
How many days left do you have in your first term?
Oh, it is...
She knows, by the way, for those that don't...
841.
841. We're
Okay.
talking to Mayor Michelle Wu.
Yeah, we're going to keep talking to her until the top of the hour. You're listening to Boston Public Radio live from the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News and facebook.com/GBH News. If you want to reach the mayor, the number is 877-301-8970.
This week
Busing will never work in this city. Never.
marks the nearly 50-year anniversary of forced school desegregation in Boston.
When I reported on opening day that no black child had been killed, we thought that was a victory. It was the saddest day in Boston's history.
What followed had a lingering impact on the city.
I don't want to bus my child to any school.
Watch American Experience, the busing battleground.
I want to have a good school in my community.
Stream on demand on the PBS app.
Support for our programs comes from you and Atlantic Design Center by Eldridge Lumber and Hardware, committed to helping you achieve your vision for a new kitchen or bathroom and guiding you from design to completion, with showrooms in York and Portland, Maine. AtlanticDesignCTR.com. And Tools of the Mind, offering a bite of tools, professional development workshops which work to re-energize pre-K and kindergarten teachers with actionable strategies to propel children's self-regulation development. More at toolsofthemind.org. And National Grid, providing access to electric heat pumps which offer heating and cooling for businesses of all sizes to help them achieve their sustainability goals. You can learn more about heat pump technology at ngrid.com/future. And Massachusetts Maritime Academy, the Commonwealth's leadership university. They offer a hands-on learning environment, helping to prepare their students to be global leaders in careers on land or at sea. Maritime.edu.
Homeless Entrepreneurs. It's an NGO helping hundreds of people around the globe find jobs and homes, all started by this man.
I don't know if you want to call it depression, but it was definitely a very hard moment in which I needed a lot of strength to get back on my feet.
Now he's helping the unhoused in Barcelona get back on their feet. Next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie, and we're live at the Boston Public Library. Where are we streaming, Marjorie? I forgot. Where's the streaming?
We are streaming, Jim. I have my script right in front of me. Streaming at youtube.com/GBH News and facebook.com/GBH News.
And we're about two-thirds the way through the monthly Ask the Mayor with Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. If you want to call her or text her, 877-301-8970, or just come on down here to the library. Where do you want to go, Marjorie?
We have another question from the Boston Public Library, homie Mike. Do you want to take that question?
Hey there. Hi. Quentin. Hello, Quentin.
Hi, Quentin.
Hi. I was going to say my name is Quentin, but I live on Mission Hill, a little area of Mission Hill where a developer proposes to make very nearby a huge building that transgresses all height limits. It's out of character with the neighborhood. The developer previously nicely built houses, restored houses on Mission Hill, but now suddenly he's gone malignant, and I would. This is one of the 5 new huge projects around our tiny little neighborhood, Worthington and Wigglesworth Street, that intersect with Tremont Street.
Quentin, what's your question for the mayor about these developments?
Can she, like Mayor Walsh and Mayor Nino, please protect us against this huge overdevelopment that's going to trash the livability of our little neighborhood?
Quentin, thanks. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Quentin. And if you, maybe my team members can come find you just to get your contact information and make sure that your thoughts are built into any of the ongoing community processes around these. What comes to my mind, first of all, is that a lot of these projects take years and years and years, and we're in a bit of a transition phase around how we think about planning and development and what the rules are for growth in Boston. We're also in a transition moment when it comes to the housing market, and as many families as are being connected with great opportunity in the schools, we are seeing far too many pushed out because of not being able to afford to stay here anymore. And so I feel a lot of pressure and urgency also in terms of generating more housing, more affordable housing, and making sure that people can live here for most of all. We want to make sure that any growth that happens in the city supports and reinforces the character of the neighborhoods, though. That is a very, very important distinction between Boston and other cities, I believe, as you really feel, as you step neighborhood to neighborhood, the history and the cultures and heritages that are represented there. And so there's an ongoing study right now, community process around civic community design as well, neighborhood design, with the chance to weigh in and identify what makes each neighborhood special so that it can guide even down to the materials and the shapes that are used in development, that will all be baked into the process and the rules moving forward. But overall, I would say we are more and more moving towards a system where we plan first and really think about what community needs before any projects are weighed. But we're in this moment of transition where much that has come before, we're still trying to address and make sure we respond appropriately as we build in the right systems to transition to the future.
Quentin, thank you. You know, this is broken record time. John Danilecki, Captain John Danilecki, the Boston Cops, 2 years ago. I
don't have an update on him today. I did ask. But
2 years ago, Internal Affairs said he violated use of force guidelines and lied. 21st of 21 Internal Affairs investigations. He's still supervising people in the street. Do you speak to Commissioner Cox about not just whether there's a resolution but about the need for it's not speedy anymore, but a resolution in timely fashion?
Yes, there are a lot of processes that we're working to speed up, and this one is still inside that process with no update as of today. But overall, I think the commissioner and I and the entire team want to make sure that there's predictability and efficiency and that this is not dragging on.
Has he assured you that there'll be some time frame within which there'll be a decision in Danilecki's case?
I haven't gotten a specific time frame.
One other thing about the cops. The other day you concluded negotiations surprising a lot of people with the firefighters. I believe when you entered office, every single contract was open.
48.
I believe with how many days to go? 841 days to go in your first term? With whatever, every contract is concluded, I believe, except with the police. There was a fabulous article, we're actually going to talk to Carl Rose from the Civil Liberties Union about this in a few minutes, about the mess in Springfield, the corruption with some of the cops in Springfield, and they basically say reform around things like arbitration, around firings, etc. Without that, we can't fix the corruption problem. How are you progressing in your discussions, negotiations with the Boston cops?
We are firmly within the arbitration process now. I believe one of the first official steps of that process is happening very soon in terms of the kind of first mediation session where all of the issues are laid out. We are approaching, I've said multiple times, I'm not going to sign a contract that doesn't include significant reform, including on some of the issues that you've been raising over a while, but even here today. And as part of arbitration, the city and the union each choose one arbitrator and then agree on another, and so it's a little bit of a tug of war back and forth, and historically it's been mostly a tug of war on salary levels, and that's it. We are really approaching this process using the full legal power of it to bring up the non-salary, it's related to salary and compensation, but to bring up the other operational reforms that we believe are necessary so that all officers will have the time with their family, the ability to support their health and well-being. They're not being dragged into forced overtime because there are shortages, because other people are on medical leave for years and years. And so there's a lot that ultimately comes back to supporting basic city services, having streets that are safe, neighborhoods that are cared for, and officers who are healthy and supported in doing their jobs.
Pardon my ignorance, but just if you can quickly, because I don't know the answer. If an arbitrator issues an award, what power do you have? You say you won't sign something. Do you have the power to veto an award?
I believe that so the step to making it final is to present it to the city council.
Right.
And so in that process, we could just not present it theoretically. I will double check on that, but I think we would work within the options that there are if it came back in a way that we weren't satisfied with.
But if one option was to not even present it to the city council and you weren't happy with the arbitration award, you'd do that?
If it came back as just everything as is, but for a certain dollar amount, that's right.
Okay, let's go to Michael Michael in Watertown. Hi.
Hi. Thanks very much for having me. If, as I think is likely, a fare-free tea in Boston should prove to be impossible, what about doing what Los Angeles is doing now, fare capping, which is a daily, weekly, and I believe monthly maximum on the amount that you pay on tea? Another possibility, at least unlimited bus transfers.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. There's in fact a whole spectrum of between full fares and absolutely no fares on any part of the system. There are lots of steps in between, and some of the ones that you mentioned have been part of what we've been advocating for a long time. In fact, this last year's state budget, or this most recently passed state budget, passed in August by the governor and the state legislature, includes $5 million to really build and put together a program around low-income fares. So that's another option that we believe will be very meaningful in the short term, is for those who qualify for benefits to have discounted fares, whether it's half the price of fares or subsidized in to some other amount. But I agree that having some of the difference between buying a monthly pass or 7-day pass even versus paying day by day is on whether you have the free funds available to make that payment up front, and whether you think you're actually going to use it as many days as to justify it. Some other systems have that, what you described, where you know that you'll hit that monthly, basically you'll get the reduced monthly cost if you use it enough to justify that, but if not, you'll just be charged at the daily rate. I think that's a really important innovation as well, and we're excited that Boston now has a seat on the MBTA board to really be directly involved in fare policy.
Do you have any idea why Secretary Fiandaca, Secretary of Transportation, stepped down?
I don't know.
Does that not concern you that you and the public have no idea why she is gone so abruptly?
I mean, there are many, many things that I don't know about state government, and so it seems like there's staffing in place in order to make all the major decisions, and I know that the acting secretary, Monica Tibbetts-Nutt, is just as experienced and informed and visionary as anyone that we could find, and so there was a great team there already, and I'm very excited by Monica's leadership.
You know, we have a couple of texts about housing. We always do, the cost of housing. And a couple of texters are mentioning that universities take up a lot of housing because they don't have enough buildings, enough rooms and dorms for their kids. So is that an issue that you can address, or are the colleges doing what they should be?
We can address it tangentially. So every 10 years, each university or large institution in the city has to come up with an institutional master plan to describe their next decade of potential growth or land use that the city has to approve and sign off on. And so this year, in fact, is when many of those what are called IMPs, institutional master plans, are coming up for renegotiation, and we have a chance to make some shared commitments with our university partners on what that means. We are incorporating housing in just about every one of those conversations. And sometimes what we have seen in the past, or what community members are worried about happening because of past experience, is a university saying, okay, we are going to build campus housing, we're going to build on-campus housing so that we are not having students spill over into rental housing in the neighborhoods. But then after getting that approved, then just raising their enrollment numbers so that they fill up that housing, and then some more anyway. And so we're having very specific conversations about not just on-campus housing and really incorporating housing in that agreement, but what it would mean for impact on the neighborhoods with those enrollment numbers as well.
We only have 30 seconds left. You want to do a quick review on busing battleground that everybody is talking
about?
about?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Superintendent Skipper and I and several of the city councilors were there with the steering committee last night. We had a bit of an advanced screening. And I've read just about every book I could find on Boston in that era and busing and what led up to it and the impacts. But to see it and to feel it, to hear the voices, to have it all put together, it was, I think most of the room was in tears as the movie ended. Just the multiple years that children were pushed to the side as a political battle played out that no one really wanted a part of. And it's an important reminder that we have a lot of work to do today, and we have a lot of resources, but we need everyone to feel that stake in not just their own communities and themselves and their families, but in our shared future.
Mayor Wu, it's great to see you as always. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.